Welcome, everybody. My name is Christian Talbot. I am the president of the Middle States Association, and I am very excited to be talking today with Dr. Chris Emdin, whom I will introduce in just a moment. But this is part of an ongoing series of live chats, part of our year of change makers in education. And as school leaders at various levels within your schools and with positional authority and informal authority, you're all creating change through the people that you work with and the kids that you work with. And we see school leadership, change leadership, and in particular, teacher growth and development distinct from observation and evaluation. These are like forces at play in the world. We think they're tectonic shifts that we really need to pay attention to. And so I know, and you will soon learn, that Dr. Chris Emdin is an expert in these areas and is going to drop a lot of wisdom on us, which I'm looking forward to. By the end of this conversation, I'm hoping that you're going to have a keener understanding of how school leaders are operating today and may need to shift their thinking going forward. What are some of the great principles of teacher growth and development, and what does that look like? And finally, some practical steps, hopefully, that you can take. And we might even talk a little bit about generative AI in there as well. But let me introduce Chris. Dr. Chris Emdin is the Maxine Green Chair for Distinguished Contributions to Education at Columbia University. He's also a professor of science education at Columbia University. He's the director of the Creativity, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship STEAM Dream Ideal Lab. He's the founder of the Hip Hop Ed movement. He's authored several books and essays. I'm giving you the tip of the iceberg on this man. And I do encourage you to spend some time on his website and social media presence to understand more about the really significant influence that Chris has had. He and I were talking just before we started about how I've been following for 10 years. This is my first opportunity to get to speak to him live. And that's because he's been important to me in my formation as an educator. And I hope that he will do the same for you. So Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
No, I'm glad to be here with you all. The organization has such a big impact in the world of education that an opportunity to engage with you about what you do and my thoughts sounds absolutely perfect. So I'm looking forward to this.
Awesome. Well, let's start with the theme of school leadership. And I want to start with something that's actually on the homepage of your website. It's a quote right at the very beginning. And I'm going to read the quote and then pose a question to you about it. So at the top of your website, you say, education is not memorization. It is the activation of the imagination and a path toward liberation. Beautiful quote. What does that challenge and that opportunity look like for school leaders right now to activate the imagination and to create that path to liberation?
That's a brilliant question. I want to start with just the idea of memorization. I think oftentimes when people think about education is not memorization, it's like students should not be in classrooms memorizing ideas. I think memorization is also about what our body memorizes about norms in the world. So education is not about the replication of age-old ideas that become so tacit to our ways of knowing and being that we cannot depart from them. So I think our body memorizes certain norms, right? Schools memorize the way schools have always operated. So it's about young folks not memorizing information, but it's also about school leaders not becoming rote in their enactment of leadership. And then it's an activation of the imagination. Nothing gets done in the world that has any true meaning without it pushing back against existing boundaries and entering into new forays of possibility. So for me, the activation of the imagination is about how do you see the way things are, and then how do you imagine how things could be. I always say to people, like, if you don't imagine the what could be, you're always imprisoned by the what is. And so this idea of like activating imagination is like, how do I go beyond what I've inherited to reimagine possibilities of what could be? And in the instance of school leaders and folks who work in education, of what could be in the service of children, right? So I ain't memorizing what nobody else did. I'm not following anybody else's established principles. I'm understanding those principles. And then I'm being really creative about what the possibilities could be towards my goal of meeting the needs of young people, right? And then ultimately, liberation. And what I mean by liberation is just freedom, right? Freedom to pursue knowledge on my own cultural turf, freedom to be able to guide an institution in ways that meet the needs of the young people, but also activates my soul and joy. Freedom is about self-actualization. I think school leaders who are fully actualized as human beings, who themselves are joyous, imaginative, and curious about the world, are better leaders because they serve as exemplars for those who are within their charge to be able to do the same. And then once you're in a school where you turned up, your energy's on 20, the kids love you, you feel whole and actualized, your teachers feel that energy from you, there's a synergy that exists, right? And when that synergy is there, Durkheim talks about it as collective effervescence. The role of any school leader is to create the conditions for collective effervescence. Once there's collective effervescence, then we can challenge ourselves to push beyond the boundaries in areas that we want to grow, right? So maybe we need growth in how young folks perform in math. Now we have a path to get there. Maybe we need growth in how we develop community beyond the school. We can go there, but that quote is about the precursor to doing good work in education. It's shaking off rote memorization. It's shaking off rote practices. It's believing in the possibilities for self. And then it's imagining the world anew with community to meet the needs of freedom for young people. So, I think that's what I mean by that quote, and that's how it connects to this concept of school leadership.
Oh, we could spend the entire rest of this time just going deeper on what you said, and I already took like a page of notes on what you said. So I'm just going to be really selective and ask you to say a few more words about a couple of things because I loved everything that you said, and I think it's profoundly important for school leaders to understand. One of the earlier things you said was, how do we see things as they are so that we can imagine what could be? So I want to suggest how I'm hearing that, and I would love for you to, riff a little bit more on it. I'm hearing you say, without any blame, when we're in schools as school leaders, we're kind of living in the matrix. Like, we don't really know, not because we're not trying, but because like it's the water that the fish swims in. It's the matrix that you live in. Like you've memorized, your body has memorized that reality. The institution has memorized that reality, and people don't really think about it. And so we need to see what's going on here externally so that we can imagine and see internally what could be different. Does that sound right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like, for me, and this is my philosophy, right? I don't blame anyone for anything other than intentional harm. If I can identify that your practice was like intentionally enacted for the sake of harming another person, then we could have smoke, right? Then it's like there's a problem here. But if you're inheriting something that just inherently you just soaked up, and then you're enacting these practices, like I came into school, they were doing this 5 years ago, I'm here now, I'm just continuing the practice, and you're sort of unbeknownst to you, part of a process of inflicting some harm. I'm not going to blame you. I'm going to open your eyes to the ways that there could be possibilities beyond that. I think education we do a great job at the blame game, right? It's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault. And this back and forth around chasing blame allows folks to start defending themselves. And so when you're defending self, then it becomes just like an ego battle. Well, you said something about me. Well, I said something about you. And as folks go back and forth with this ego battle and personality battles, the harm's being done and it's not being addressed. So unless you harming babies on purpose, I ain't gonna blame you. I'm gonna open up your eyes, beloved. Like, I'm gonna show you, like, look, there's another way to do this. Look, this is the way it was done before. What if we remix it in this way? And it's about an orientation towards possibility rather than like the inheriting of the norm. And like the whole vibe I'm on right now is about the activating of the creative imagination. It's about radical dreaming of new possibility. And that work does not mean that we just shun all that's existed before, but it's about, in this concept of the capacities for imaginative thinking developed by Maxine Greene when she was at Lincoln Center. The fundamental piece of any effective change is just to notice deeply. And we don't take enough time with that because it's not sexy, right? But to sit at the things that I'm drawing from and enacting and just notice deeply. Is that harming? Is that what I really want to do? Is that what I meant? Like, where does this come from? how may I imagine it differently? Like sometimes we just take a time out and notice deeply. And the blame game don't do well at noticing deeply to see the humanity of human beings.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things we love to do at Middle States is to take these really powerful ideas and translate them down to the ground level. So
Mhm.
what might be 2 or 3 techniques, practices, something that you can recommend to school leaders to create that pause so that people can notice what's going on as a precondition to imagining something different?
Yeah, look, for 20 years, man, like I was doing this and wrote about this in my doctoral dissertation eons ago. The best way to interrupt and notice deeply is to build in a practice called the cogenerative dialogue. And the cogenerative dialogue is a conversation that a school leader has with teachers or that teachers have with students, but it's built into the school day where we are co-constructing um, an exchange around improving a thing that we both are not comfortable with, right? Like, how do we co-generate conversation about improving practice? And it can't be pie in the skies. Like, we're going to co-generate a conversation about improving the conditions of learning in America. It's not going to work. It's about engaging with young folks or with teachers and saying, what is going on in this shared space that's not working for you or that's
Mm.
not working for me? And how may we together study that phenomena, notice that phenomena deeply, and then co-construct a plan of action for improving that particular thing? And I love what you said. And I'm glad that Middle States is taking this sort of orientation towards don't devalue the big ideas. Find ways to have practice that supports it. A cogenerative dialogue becomes a seedbed towards immense possibility because it forces both the teacher, the principal, and the young person to take a time out from just experiencing the thing to studying the thing. And after studying the thing, co-developing a plan of action for improving the thing. And what's beautiful about that practice is that what gets co-generated varies across contexts, right? So, the principal might notice that the teachers are not greeting the students in the hallway, and that's why the kids are cranky during first through fourth period, right? And so in one school, it's about how do we co-develop a plan of action for changing our greeting.
Mm.
In another place, it could be like after lunch, the kids are really excited and we're not doing anything to give them an opportunity for pause and to debrief. And so now, how do we co-generate a plan of action around allowing our young folks to be able to settle in before they go back into their academic tasks? So you institutionalize the process, like the mechanism, the dialogues themselves get built in as a mechanism, but what emerges from the dialogues varies across context.
Yeah.
And now we're noticing deeply together, and then we can imagine together. This is back to imagination. Once we have a co-generated plan of action, we can imagine what the school could look like if we address this thing together. And so, radical imagination begins with deep conversation.
Awesome.
And if folks ain't talking to each other or they're busy blaming each other, we can't dream together. And so I think build in the practice of dialogue becomes the seedbed for activating collective imagination.
Yeah. I love your intentional repetition of that prefix co. It's not a dialogue coming just from the adults. It's with the kids, co-generated. And the metaphor of the seedbed to me is really critical for everybody to think about. That we don't force plants and flowers to grow, right? We create the conditions, we nurture the soil, we make sure there's good sunlight, we get rid of the bugs. So all like very rich, but
You
practical.
preaching, Christian. I love the description. I think you feel me. I think, and also just to accentuate this point about the code, it's also recognizing that everybody has a different task, but no one has more authority over another human being, right?
Mhm.
So somebody is charged with being the principal. So their principal responsibilities, right? Someone is charged with being an AP. There are responsibilities that are unique to the assistant principal. Their responsibilities unique to the teacher. But we are all collectively a piece of this thing. Our job titles don't describe our capacity to contribute to the construction of an environment that facilitates learning or becoming or being. And I think folks oftentimes get so caught up in their title, like I'm the principal, so I should lead the dialogue. No, shut up. Go sit down somewhere. You got your own things to do. Like we respect you for it, but you don't run things here. When you have distributed management, right? When you have shared investment, that's when magical things happen. And that's when folks will defer to you when they need you to take charge. But anybody deferring to you if you're trying to take in charge of things that are not your calling. I always say, like, stay in your ministry. This is not your ministry.
Mm,
Stay in your ministry, I'll stay in mine. Together, we'll come together and build something. And I think it's about not getting caught up in the title or the position or the pay grade, but think about it rather as these are my responsibilities for ensuring that this place operates well. And other folks have their own responsibilities as well.
yeah, that's beautifully said. And I mentioned at the beginning, before we started talking, that when we talk at Middle States about school leaders, we, of course, we're talking about people with positional authority, as you were just describing, but we also mean anybody, whether it's a different administrator, it's sort of somewhere in the middle, a classroom teacher, a student, a custodian, anybody who is
Yes.
creating positive change, who's taking the initiative to say, I think something can be better here, and I'm going to do
Yeah.
something to move in the direction of something being better. That to us is also school leadership. And so what I hear you saying is that there's a kind of an interdependence, um, and the teacher's well-being depends on the student's well-being, and the student's well-being depends on the teacher's well-being, and they
Right.
all depend on the administrators, right? So it's a kind of an ecosystem model that you're describing. And I'm wondering, Chris, if we begin to kind of like shift the frame of the conversation to this particular moment, what are
Mhm.
you hearing and what are you seeing about how um, co-generative dialogue in schools is being challenged by, maybe supported by, generative AI?
I'm a big AI guy. Like, and folks often say, like, what are the challenges of artificial intelligence? There are none. This this is a phenomenon that is a condition of our time. It's not going anywhere. And as a consequence of it being a condition of our time, then it actually aligns to some philosophies of folks who are out, like, people who try to group me in a crowd. They're like, oh, Chris is with the culturally relevant people. He talks about the Black kids. No, I'm talking about schooling. I'm talking about education. And for me, to be culturally relevant is to be attentive to the conditions of our time. So this is a cultural phenomena that is everybody has a stake in. And so for us to be truly culturally relevant educators, we have to have an investment in how to make meaning of AI, machine learning, and how it connects to teaching and learning. So there are a couple of ways that it connects, right? I think that on a sort of tangible, practical teacher level, we have a mechanism now for helping teachers to enhance the technical aspects of their profession, right? I can generate a lesson plan format. I can generate a rubric. I can generate some questions I could pose to young people. And I can, if I have a really good account, I can actually put in parameters for my demographic and what they need to know. There's something really beautiful about the adoption of the technical aspects of teaching and learning by machines to allow us to tap into the essence of teaching and learning, which is the human part. Right? Like, and so there has to be like this relationship where the human beings are adding value where they have value, which is in their humanity, their connectedness to community, their understandings of young people, and the fact that they understand realities in ways that are experiential, which machines just don't have the capacity to do. And at the
Mm,
same time, allowing the machines to be able to take charge in the aspects of teaching and learning where they're more proficient. I can draw from more information. I can change the parameters of my inquiry. So when the machines offer us the best of what they can, and the educators offer up the best that they can, and then we're in consistent dialogue, not writ large, just taking what the machine gives us, because that's back to memorization that I said is not what we do. But it's a sort of dialogic, experiential phenomena where we understand our value, we understand what the technology's value is, and there's a sort of like ongoing dialogue and conversation. So that's that aspect. There are also aspects where there are things that seemingly superficial that are integral to the emotion of the classroom that AI does really well. So I'm doing a project now called the Collider Classroom, which is really intentional about infusing the arts into the classroom environment, because I've done research on the impact it has on teaching and learning. Well, in my project, we have 7 classrooms across New York City. We got young folks in New York City who are learning how to be able to utilize AI to be able to create emotion that they need in the class. So a young person will go into DALI off ChatGPT and infuse prompts around Black joy and Black excitement and sort of an Afrofuturist backdrop. And then the artificial intelligence is creating that image. And that image is now going up in the classroom. And that
Mm.
image is now activated in the classroom at times when young folks don't feel joyous. So now you have AI being a co-teacher that taps into the social emotional realities for young people. I think this is the next frontier of education. We have to have a more sophisticated approach to the use of AI. And also, we also have to ensure that populations who are historically not been able to have access to technology or are perpetually only consumers of technology, but not utilizing that technology, gain the opportunity to be able to engage fully. So saying like kids aren't ready for that yet, let's wait till they get to college, or let's like, it's senseless. What we want to be able to build is an aptitude for those tools, a recognition of their power and potential, and a skill set of young people who have a skill set to be able to engage in really thoughtful and critical ways. So they're not passively receiving, but they're also producing. I mean, I could go on this for a while, but the long and short of it is, I don't think AI is negative. I think they're negative people who are scared of change, right? Who don't know how to embrace a cultural phenomena and what the zeitgeist is of the time. And if you're scared of it, learn it. Like, why are you scared? Like, this is also my philosophy. Like, if there are things that are emerging that I don't understand, I just take the time to notice it deeply and make meaning of it until I become more proficient at it. The fear of the unknown is just an entrapment in your past. So, study it deeply. You don't even have to know it. Here's the thing too. I'm sorry, I be getting hype about this stuff because I get excited. But you don't even, here's the thing too. You don't have to know it to teach it, which is another thing that folks get wrong. Like, you don't have to know something to be able to teach it. You have to be able to introduce it to the young people, introduce it to your teachers and say, here's the thing that's going on. I don't know either. How can we co-construct and make meaning of this phenomenon together? And we develop our shared expertise in real time. Here's the thing about teaching or leading. It is most purely activated by folks who can operate in the key of life. Right? Stevie Wonder had songs in the key of life. School leaders who know how to operate in the key of life create more beautiful product. Right? On that album, some of the songs Stevie constructed live in the studio, recorded it, and put it on the album because he was making meaning and sense of it as time was going by. And so good teaching, good leading, being a good human, right? This is the other part of it too. Like, we talk about teaching and leading and education, like we exist in this vacuum. Nah, being a good human is about paying attention to what's going on in the world and trying to make meaning of it to ensure that it doesn't harm, but rather heals.
Again, we could spend many hours probably unpacking a lot of this. So I'm just going to zoom in on a couple of things. The first is I want to repeat something that you said at the very beginning, because it strikes me as profound and a kind of important frame for the rest of this conversation, which is that to be culturally relevant is to be attentive to the conditions of our time, and that generative AI is not going anywhere. I put all of my chips on, we're going to see more and more and more of it, not less of it. It may become invisible, may become embedded in everything in ways that electricity is embedded in almost everything, and we don't really think about it, but it's going to be pervasive. And so for very practical reasons, if we want to be culturally relevant, we have to recognize this is a condition of our time, as you said. Did you
Yo, Christian, you said something really profound. I gotta put a pin in that because that was a bar, right? Do you know what I mean when I say it was a bar? Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah.
Okay. Here's the thing, because you said something really profound. It may become so embedded in what we do that we don't know it's there. It may become as sort of mundane as electricity. And here's the thing. If something has the potential to become so woven into the fabric of our time that we won't even know it's there, and we choose not to understand it, that is absolutely dangerous.
Yeah.
If you're waiting until the thing you don't know becomes a fabric of your existence and you don't know how to use it, understand it, manipulate it, bend it towards your own goals and your own conditions, it means somebody else does and will. And so now the conversation about generative AI is also about, if you don't know what somebody else do and they're not really rocking with you, you will be shocked at the things that they can do to, for, about you without your permission, right? So it now becomes a social justice issue. Hiding AI, hiding machine learning without bringing it into schools, without introducing it to communities, now actually becomes a civil rights issue. You know, if you hide something from somebody that has the potential to shape their existence, it's a criminal act.
Mm. Okay. Again, so many different ways we can take this, but I want you to go deeper on a couple of things you said related
Okay.
to this that you just beautifully produced. If you're scared of it, learn it. You don't have to know it to teach it.
That's
We
right.
can co-develop our understanding together. Now, I'm 100% with you. My guess is everybody who's on this call right now is 100% with you. And we also all have worked with or are working with people who say, it's precisely because I'm scared of it that I will not learn it. It's precisely because I don't know it that I won't teach it. Now, that might just be, an immovable object meeting an immovable force. But I'm wondering if, again, particularly with generative AI, are you seeing anything, maybe in these 7 schools you're working with, or maybe in other conversations you're having, that is threading a needle there, or figuring out a way to help those who are fearful to get a little closer to learning it?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question, but I want to say one thing. There are no such thing as immovable objects. Um, Even if you think about it sort of scientifically, right? There are molecules, there are components of every phenomena that it looks like it's not moving, but it's actually moving within it. And so then the work becomes, if I can't move a big block,
Hmm.
I might find a way to heat it, right? I might find a way to put something beneath it and prop it up. I might find a ways to be able to put some oil in there to decrease the friction.
Yeah.
Nothing is impossible. There's an age-old saying, the word impossible in itself says I am possible. So I want to begin with that. Like I'm, perhaps I'm a perpetual optimist. I don't believe anything is immovable. I don't think there are any educators that are so stuck in their ways of knowing that they can't shift in some ways. And the ones who seem like they can't shift, if they are embedded in conditions where everybody else is shifting, they will either move along or move out. And either way we win, right? But around the AI thing, we also have to have a recognition of the fact that it's fear that folks are feeling, right? It's defiance is oftentimes a mask for fear. You know that,
Yes.
right? Even with
Yes.
young people, that kid who's like absolutely defiant in a classroom, they're scared because they don't want you to know that they don't understand what's going on. That kid who is like can't read is the most rambunctious. So any instance where I see somebody exhibit the sort of like really sort of gross apprehension or gross like unwillingness to be able to engage in something, I know it's fear. Now, how do you battle fear? You battle fear by making folks feel comfortable. Right? Anybody who's scared of anything, the first step is you say, like, just unclench, right? And sometimes unclenching means tell me what you're doing already that works well for you.
Hmm.
Tell me what you're doing that makes you feel comfortable. Tell me how you express humanity in your happy place. It becomes it's less about, well, if you don't get it, you got to move along. It's like, if you don't get it and you're that defiant, you scared. If you're scared, how do I make you comfortable? How do I make you comfortable? By bringing you back to your place of comfort, right? So that place of comfort, pedagogically, oftentimes is, what have you done in your classroom that works well for you? Oh, I'm really, really phenomenal about creating assessments for young people. Word? That's your thing? That's your expertise? You do that well? Let me show you how this tool may help you to enhance your existing skill set. Right? And so, you have to have an asset-based and strength-based approach to introducing anything that's a new phenomenon. So that's like, the one part. Um, I've also seen now a bunch of courses on folks on learning how to AI. A good friend of mine, Ashley Kobe, who's a really, really, really brilliant marketing and salesperson who works with Pepsi. He said, like, yo, I was in Philadelphia. The Philadelphia Public Library had this course. It was like, I wish I could remember the name of the brother who put the course on because it's brilliant. So there are ways to also have entry points. I always find the best ways to create better teachers is by putting them in conditions to be good students, right? And it's like, if when I introduce you to a concept that you're worried about and you're not sure of, you're not well, that's the same way that your students are feeling when they're in this space. So it's about creating professional development opportunities for educators to be able to sit in the seat of students around phenomena that's out of reach for them. It helps them to develop their humanity, but it also helps them in their willingness to try, because you can always go back to, would you want your student to not want to try to learn how to balance that equation?
Yeah.
Right. So the way you tap into a teacher's student self is by reminding them of how close they are to their students. And then, so one is you teach from a place of understanding, not just like bring folks along, but the response to fear. Fear begins with comfort. Comfort begins with getting back to somebody's strengths, and then teaching them ways to enhance their existing strengths. And the other, I would say, for educators is give them the opportunity to be students like their students around phenomena that they're uncomfortable with, and then draw always back to the student experience. This is how your students would react. Wouldn't you push them further? And then that kind of activates the humanity in a fascinating way. So those are two strategies that I would use in the instance that you described.
Well, you've created a great segue to the next section of this conversation about teacher growth and development. But before we get there, I just want to make a few connections. And this is amazing, Chris, because like I said at the beginning, you and I have never spoken before, never met before. And, you've said so many things that resonate with me personally, but also with Middle States institutionally. Like you, I'm a professional optimist. I don't believe that there's a teacher out there who can't change, or is, just simply won't change. Sometimes you got to heat the object up or add the oil or do whatever. But you have to meet them where they're at. And I fully subscribe to the idea that one of the best ways to make people comfortable, as you said, is to bring them back to their place of comfort and find out, well, what is already working with you? So it's fascinating as a question that you pose, because in our teacher growth and development work, which is led by Dr. Nicole Grimes, who's on the call right now, and Amber Berry, who's on the call right now, is around this idea that we want to start with teachers' strengths. What are you already good at? What comes to you as naturally as breathing? We bring it down to the level of, talk to us about what are your go-to moves, as you described to Chris. Like, what are you doing that's already working for you? Maybe it's performing assessments, maybe it's something else. But every teacher, everyone, even the ones that we might not say are not the best teachers around, every single one of them has a go-to move or a few go-to moves that are killer. And by starting there and focusing on those assets and strengths, we have seen so much growth and movement in the people that have been part of the workshops, again, that Nicole and Amber have been running on. We call it Best Teachers on Earth. And we call it that for a reason, right? That was Nicole actually came up with that phrase. So very much aligned with your idea of an asset-based, strengths-based approach. And the other part of this, and they go hand in hand, is my conviction, the Middle States conviction, that all of this work that we're doing, and especially the work around teacher growth and development, has to be human-driven and AI-informed. In that order, we're relational first, and we have to understand what's going on in the world, right? Human-driven, AI-informed. And I worry about schools that take what, you didn't use this word, but it sounded to me like what you were describing as, like, you got to, get on the bus or get out. You got to change. This is what we're doing. Don't want to hear it. That to me is a very transactional approach, whereas we want to adopt that relational approach.
I love what you said for a couple of reasons, and I want to extend one metaphor that you mentioned, like the idea of the killer move, right? It's like if my two-step is tight, I could be okay in the club. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't have to have all the steps. Like, if I get back to my two-step, I'm good. And I think this idea of the two-step being down as a means to be able to sort of, like, pun intended, ratchet up possibilities and what people are willing to do, I think is a really fascinating concept. And I don't think we do a good, like, I don't want to leave that as a metaphor. I actually want to embed that as a philosophy, like as a leadership philosophy. So I think sometimes people oftentimes relegate these brilliant points that we're making, and say, "Oh wow, that's a great idea." Great ideas can be implemented with good practices and good school-wide philosophies. And I think it's like we have to be intentional about not getting the theoretical as so abstract that we can't translate that into real life practice. So I want to say that. And then this idea of, like, being relational and not being transactional, I find really, really interesting, because I think and this is semantics. I think transactions are really important if we think about what transactions are, what they could be, right?
Yeah.
So it's a transaction in the sense of I give something, you give something. That absolutely is, ultimately, that's actually relational. So it's like it's semantics, but I think I want folks to understand that. Like it goes back to like almost like a Bourdieusian sort of like idea of all human beings have social and cultural capital, and ideally, capital exists. Sort of extending an economic metaphor. Now I'm being real professorial. Indulge me though, but it's and like extending that economic metaphor of holding capital or storing capital to this idea of that ultimately you want to be able to have capital exchanges with other individuals. And so this idea of like that, starting with your core move, it's like, okay, that's your core move. How do you give up that move to be able to receive something else? So it might look like, why don't you teach me your dance move? Or how do I provide you with opportunities to teach other teachers your dance move? So I think one of the pieces of working with adults that we oftentimes miss is that first of all, nobody wants to feel like they don't know nothing, right? Second of all, it's great when you say, "Oh, I really like that skill set. Here's how you can improve that." That's another level. The ultimate level is you're so good at that. I think that you can offer that to somebody else.
Yeah.
Right. You elevate the teacher from like, I'm just this passive receiver of things and he might think I'm good, to wait, I'm an expert in a domain that I can offer to somebody else. And I'm also keenly deficient in another. And so the willingness to exchange begins with an opportunity to be able to utilize my capital to give to other folks. We will oftentimes be like, well, that teacher ain't no good at all. And so that if you name a teacher as not good at all in your building, and that teacher knows that's how you feel about them, and you see no redeeming qualities, all they're going to do is double down on being the thorn in the bane of your existence. Yeah. If you say that teacher has areas of improvement here, but I can identify this and this I can see they're good at, and this I can have them lead the PD in my school. Ooh. You know what I mean? The game changes completely. And I love offering professional development. It's one of my favorite things to do. I got a beautiful team of folks. It's like I call it we're like Phil Jackson, teaching and learning. I got a triangle offense of good pedagogy, right? Like I believe in what I do. At the same time, I understand that the chief limitation to what I can offer any school, any university, any college who hires me is that I'm not there. And that what I offer can only be enhanced by folks who are in the place with you, taking it to the next level after I leave, or prepping the work before I get there. And because then you don't want the dude to come in and swoop in and be the hero and then leave again. Right. Nothing gets done. Right. So it's a co-constructed transactional relationship that ultimately develops to become relational.
Yeah, I love that. And what I hear you talking about, Chris, is something that I think we tend to forget about the adults in our schools, but that we know is true about our kids, our students, which is at the foundation of any great learning experience is the understanding by a student that my teacher or my teachers, they see me, they know me, and they care about me. And the same is true for teachers. Like teachers want to know that their fellow teachers and their administrators see them for who they are. And if you say, well, she's no good at anything, you're not seeing that person. You're not really understanding them. And they want to know that they're cared for too. So if I've gotten the spirit of what you said correct there, then I would love to hear you talk a little bit about something that maybe I'll put myself in this category because I haven't been working inside of school for about a year and a half now. What's something that maybe we have failed to recognize about the post-pandemic reality for the average teacher, the typical teacher? What are we not seeing and caring about enough with them?
I love that question. And I've been talking about this around the country recently. I give a whole segment of talks around the concept of a post-pandemic pedagogy, which necessarily has to accentuate the magic of the learning during pandemic. Like everybody wants to be like, oh my gosh, the pandemic was so awful. Let's forget it ever happened. You hear the whole back to normal, like whatever. But there were some young people who had their best learning experiences ever during the pandemic. And there were lessons that education in that instance taught us. For example, one, just the concept of utilizing digital tools to be able to engage with audiences. Just that. like a back to normal teaching and learning where young folks are not interacting online, you're not zooming somebody into class, and you're not having a Zoom. Like I've had my kids in my class that I'm working with be on Zoom with the class next door. These are phenomenal tools that we never had before, that a post-pandemic reality must not only take on a return to normal, but an adoption of methods for engagement that we learned during pandemic. Also, we learned during pandemic the power of scheduling. Sometimes some babies don't need to be at school at 8 o'clock. Some may need to wake up at 10. Like, so, and the pandemic offered us those possibilities. Also, like the ability to be able to tap into somebody's life world in a really interesting way, right? Like in your Zooms, who's leaving their background open? Who's using who's blanking it? Who's shutting it off completely and is only audio? Who's as a function of that, do I learn about who wants to let me in? Who wants me to ask questions? So I actually think that if an educator zooms into their class virtually before they have the school year, you get insight into the understandings, the possibilities, and the realities of those young people that then enhances how you teach them when you go back. So that's another aspect. Also, the advent of social media as a communication tool and as a delivery method. If you a teacher in 2024 and you ain't got no IG, and you ain't got no TikTok, my TikTok is not really that popping, but I'm working on it. But if you're not engaging on those platforms and utilizing them as a way to engage with young people, having office hours online, having like if you're not taking on that method of post-classroom communication in the platform where young folks are embedded, you're missing the boat. So, I would say post-pandemic pedagogy accentuates the in-person magic that we had pre-pandemic, but also learns from the strategies, the methods, the delivery methods, and communication approaches that were enacted during pandemic, and also the technological savvy that is essential for communicating with this new audience. And post-pandemic pedagogy takes the best of all those things and then merges that. Hybridity is a way of existing nowadays. Like if you can't merge the worlds, it can't work. And I'm talking about digital and real life. I'm also talking about in persona. Like, my book, Ratchetdemic, shameless plug, but not shameless. Like the concept behind Ratchetdemic is just that, right? It's the merging of your ratchet and academic identities to coexist in a human body and form so that you're comfortable to be able to take on academic tasks and challenges. In much the same way, a post-pandemic classroom is equal parts in person, also digital, also social emotional, but also academically rigorous. It's in the complications that the magic happens. All beautiful buildings. I'm like, as a STEM person, like I really study sort of engineering principles, and I always find like the most beautiful modern buildings I've witnessed are those where you get like the big glass, you see through the windows, but the wires are always hidden, the forms are hidden, the structures are hidden. Why? Because the magic that upholds the magic in real time is embedded in the interstitial spaces. And if you study what's happening interstitially, you appreciate what you have in the present. Much in the same way, the pandemic offered us a peek into the interstitial spaces, right? A deep understanding of the sort of like the nuance that we should now implement in contemporary education.
Yeah. You talked about the post-pandemic reality, creating the opportunity, the space for us to see the power of technology, the power of scheduling, the power of social media, all of those things that you described as possibilities feel like they relate right back to the opening quote that we discussed about imagination, or that
Yes,
these
sir.
are imaginative possibilities if we have the will to see them, right?
Facts.
Chris, I spoke recently with a young teacher at a school in the Bronx, and he's demoralized, maybe even jaded, about the possibility of change in his particular school. And he's a young teacher, so things his perspective may evolve. But as he was talking, it seemed like there was this conversation that he and I needed to have about the difference between people as problems and systems as problems.
Yeah.
And, it felt like he was describing like a classic systems level dilemma. That school is underfunded. Most of the kids who go to that school rather, they live in or close to poverty. School leadership, they do their best. They keep the place running. And he actually called that out as like a positive, like they really do a good job. Like they make sure like kids are attending, they make sure the building's in operating condition, right? But it's very operational focused.
Yeah.
But he felt like that meant that there just wasn't anything left over for real change or transformation.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and I'm calling him a kid because he's in his 20s, but for a younger teacher or less experienced teacher like that, who's got such a big heart and their intentions are all in the right place, and they're kind of on the cusp of like, do I stick with this or
Yeah.
do I go to a different career? Because I don't
Yeah.
want to have my heart ripped out.
Yeah.
Um, what does teacher growth and development look like for that kind of person?
That's such a beautiful question, man. Like, the first thing I would say to that young person would be, you never give your heart to a sucker. Real talk, right? So you're in a school. There's the building, there's administrators, there's the structures, there's the tests, there's also the babies. So I could be in the school and not of the school. Y'all don't get me to preaching in here. I don't want to give a Pentecostal pedagogical kind of conversation right now. I could be in the building and not of the building, right? I could be in the building and not give my heart to the structure, but give my heart to the children, right? And I always tell folks, like, you got to understand the differences between institutional knowledge and intuitional knowledge. Institutional structure and intuitional soul affirming culture. And they're varieties. Listen, the school building simply is a carrying case for the magical work. If you give yourself to the carrying case and not the work itself, then you done gave up. So I always say I focus on the children. And then I make them aware of the perpetuity of the structures, which is to say, the structure's going to do what the structures do. Here's the thing. A system that was designed to break you ain't never going to set you free. It requires the person within said structure to create freedom that surpasses the thing. We give too much props to the building. That's what I say to this young person. Like, listen, I'm going to just talk about me real quick. No matter where I go on the face of this planet, here's one thing I keenly understand. If the building or the institution or the structure was built before my existence, oftentimes it meant it wasn't even created with me in mind. In this black body I'm in and with this brown skin I hold, the theoretical frameworks that have been adopted, that have become the part and parcel of education, were constructed in a time where black and brown folks were not even supposed to know how to read. The school building was probably created in a time where there was an expectation about the possibilities for the young folks there. Like, I go into it knowing this joint ain't built for us, beloved, but the beautiful thing is that we are here. And now that we're here, what we going to do with the joint, right? And so, there's always this tool that says, it's an Audre Lorde quote. I love me some Audre Lorde. And it's like, the master's tools will never destroy the master's house.
Right.
And I believe it from the depths of my being. But what if you enter the master's house and use the tools of radical possibility constructed in communities that we're not allowed to be in to begin with? I'm not trying to burn down the master's house. I'm trying to take that motherfucker over, right? And you take it over through a revolutionary approach to pedagogy that is keenly attuned to young folks, knowing that I am beyond this thing that's supposed to be too big. The human spirit is bigger than any school, build it in any building, build it in any university. Approaches to teaching and learning that were enacted by indigenous populations that were not supposed to be educated, who educated themselves anyway, is a more complex and nuanced pedagogical strategy than any rubric that any school can design for you. So it's about what your orientation is, beloved. Like, if you keyed into who you are, who you're doing it for, the school building is just there. If the school building burnt down tomorrow, would you still want to engage with those young folks? Would you still connect with them? Would you still set their souls on fire? Will you still be committed to the task of igniting possibility for the next generation? And the answer to those kind of young people is always yes, 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 yes. So why are you worried about the school for? In fact, what you're doing right now is just doing the school a favor. When you show up and show out for them babies and them babies is turned up, you model for the school what they can do. See, here's the thing. The structures are broken. They're being replicated. We keep memorizing and replicating the same old thing. The educators go within it and they start listening to the broken structure. But if you go in there and listen to your soul, let your soul speak, let your pedagogy speak, let that reality pedagogy kick in, let that academic fervor come in. What you're doing the school a favor by showing up, because then you model for the whole entire system what beauty and power and possibility can look like. So I ain't never worried about a school, a building, a university, or an institution. They're simply there to offer us, a space to do the work, some health insurance, a little bit of bread to, pay your little bills. Like those things are very, very different than the soul work required to teach and teach well.
Yeah. Chris, the Audre Lorde quote is a classic and profound. And what you did with it, what you added to it, to me is equally profound, which is shifting the lens from tearing down the master's house to using the master's tools to create, not to destroy, or not only to destroy, but to create, which again links back to imagination as a path to liberation. And, this was before anybody joined the call, but you and I were chatting very quickly about your son. And I wrote this down because you said it. And I was like, wow, I got to write that down. Talking about, a young person with young people, you're with them this morning, you're in his school, right? And you said, anytime you spend time with young people, your faith in the world explodes in the best sense, right?
Yeah.
So just talk a little bit about what that means. How does your faith explode when you spend time with young people?
Yeah, man. Like a couple things, right? Like, look, when you look into the eyes of a child and recognize that this is who will inherit the earth, right? Like you're literally every person who takes the time to notice a young person literally can look into the future through their eyes. Um, that that young person that you interact with will then shape a world that just by function of space and time continuum you will never see.
Hmm.
And that through them you can then shape a world you will never touch. Like this is why I love the act of teaching, right? Like here's the thing. I know that if I do what I've been put on this planet to do by setting young folks' souls on fire, that I will be eternal. Like I, Chris Emdin, will live forever. Like think about that. And not just like I, Chris Emdin, like Christian Talbot can live forever, right? Because I deposit something powerful into the soul of a person who will shape a world that I can never see. That is the radical act of teaching, right? It's teaching is an act of protest. Working with young folks is an act of protest. Like you're protesting against the past histories that are fighting to be present and fighting to exist in the future. And through your teaching, you say to those things of the past that you can be no more. And you only do that through your interaction with the children. Come on, fam. Like this work is the most incredible thing. And so every time I'm with a young person, every time I hear children's voices, it sounds like angels to me. Every time I deposit something into a young person's soul and I know it resonates just because of like the deep head nod. It's not even a response sometimes. Sometimes you just see the head nod. And when that head goes up and goes down, it's the downward motion of the head draws back to the body and the being. You know what I mean? And the work of teaching is to ignite a generation with open heart, open mind, open will. And once hearts get opened, empathy gets developed. So then you have an opportunity to shape a more kind world. When the mind gets open, a thirst for information begins. So now you have a smarter world.
Yes.
And when you open up conviction and there's a will to affect change, then we have somebody who will perpetually fight against injustice. So know that you can impact those things through the art and craft of teaching is the most magical thing on the face of the planet.
Amen. And I'm going to add to the chat. I mean, I could never have predicted that we'd end in this place. I'm going to add to the chat this benediction that we use. It's a non-sectarian benediction. We use this at Middle States. And at the end of this benediction, it talks about the fact that we, as educators, we're ministers. We're not messiahs. We're workers. We're not master builders. And it ends by saying, we are prophets of a future not our own, which is exactly, Chris, what you were just saying, that we can see the future through our kids' eyes. We can impact the future through them. We won't live to see it, but that's okay because we're prophets of a future that's not our own.
It's all, Chris. Love it.
So
Magic.
Yeah, so it's in the chat, and I invite everybody to, to check that out. Um, we don't have time for the many more questions I have for you, and there's even a couple from the audience. I want to end, Chris, with just a really quick thought experiment, and then I want to say a few closing words. So, um, given where you see the hockey puck going with generative AI and other things in education, um, and you have carte blanche. Someone says, Chris, I'm going to write you a check for whatever you tell me you need to create your ideal startup school. However many kids you want in that school, we're gonna fund it.
Yeah.
What would that school look like?
Oh, man, this is like my ever going dream. I will say this, that I'm close to that vision at the Steam Dream and Idea Lab. Um, you know, right now at Skidmore College, we have this lab that is it's equal parts a decolonized makerspace, 3D printers, vinyl cutters, sewing machines, tools. So my school would look just like that. The young folks will have access to the most cutting edge technology and the most basic tools for expressing creativity, markers, crayons, paints, in the same space with 3D printers and all the AI tools and a studio in the back, right? So it's like open access to all those tools. So we have that at the Steam Gym and Idea Lab. Then, what I describe as a post-pandemic classroom. A classroom is a place for reflection. The classroom was originally named the glass room, a place where the light always comes in, um, where young folks can reflect and seek new knowledge, and then access to outdoor space. So at Skidmore right now, we have 150 acres of Northwoods for folks to go outside, have their feet touch the earth, to reflect deeply. And I think it's equal parts access to technology and creative tools, traditional classroom to concretize ideas and make meaning, and then in touch with outer space for contemplative and sort of like reflective kind of work. So my school would look exactly like that. Um, it will be interdisciplinary in nature. So we're learning science, art, math, and social studies all in the same time. It'll be deeply project based, but with high academic standards. And our biggest standard will be radical joy. Um, and I'm a firm believer in STEAM, man. I think folks kind of like understate what we mean by STEAM, right? Like science, tech, engineering, the arts, and mathematics operate in synergy with high expectations for content knowledge, but also like a core artistic value. I was having a conversation with Neil deGrasse Tyson the other day, and he said, Chris, why we call it the schools of arts and sciences is because no matter what the endeavor you engage in, you want to get it down to a science and you want to raise it up to an art. And so in my school, young folks will be able to bring everything down to a science, understand the technical components of it, but always operate raising it up to an art in the most creative and imaginative way possible. So yeah, those are some of the things I would do in my spot.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Chris, I cannot thank you enough.
All love.
This was an energizing and fulfilling conversation for me. I hope it was for the audience too. 3 really quick takeaways. Um, I need to do my research on, and everybody on this call needs to do research on cogenerative dialogue. It sounds like an awesome technique leading to better imagination of what's possible, leading to liberation. So that's takeaway number 2. And takeaway number 3 is be in the building, but not of the building, and focus on being the prophet of the future that is not yours, not ours, but belongs to the young person. So thank you again, Chris. There were many more takeaways. I had to keep it to just 3. And then for everybody else, we have another live chat next week with Flint AI and Episcopal Academy about how to use generative AI in service of great learning experience, which Chris just described with his ideal school. And I look forward to welcoming everybody back for more of those conversations. And Chris, I hope that we'll get you back too, because this was really
Now we'll build soon. Let me get a couple shout outs. If in hip hop tradition, you got to close out the gym with a shout out. So shout out to the homie Nicole Grimes who invited me into the space. Shout out to Middle States for having me. I know what y'all do in the world, and I see how you're trying to shift what that work looks like. And I appreciate that. I appreciate an organization with your history, with your potential, taking on this core work. So shout out to y'all. Shout out to the entire hip hop ed community, folks who are joining on live. I appreciate y'all. Hit me up on the socials. I'd love to talk more about any of this. And also pick up your boys' books. My most recent book on STEAM is STEM, Steam, Make, Dream, which is about really reimagining the culture of science, math, engineering, arts, and mathematics. Also pick up Ratchetdemic, which I think is, for me, like it's like my favorite thing I've ever written. I put my soul into that, so please pick up Ratchetdemic. And if you're interested in Cogen's more, a really good book to pick that up is For White Folks Who Teach in the Hood, and the rest of y'all too. I appreciate you guys for having me. Love and light to you all. I hope you learned something. I hope you were inspired. If I said something that hurt and harmed, it was not my intention, but I take full responsibility. If I said something that opened your heart up, made you think and be creative, certainly wasn't me. I thank the ancestors who flowed through me. All right, y'all, peace.
Thanks, Chris.
No doubt.